Mark Lowry sat across from Bill Gaither and said the words he had been carrying for months, words he had never spoken out loud to anyone. He told him he was burned out, not road-tired, the kind that clears after a week at home, soul-tired, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up on a stage because after enough years, you learn to hide it perfectly. That conversation stayed private for a long time, and the version of the story fans were given never included this part. But to understand what that moment truly cost him, you have to go back to the late 1990s, and what you'll find there changes everything about how we see Mark Lowry. Before we go any further, if you love the untold stories behind gospel music's greatest voices, go ahead and subscribe right now. We share stories like this one every week. And coming up next, we're going to reveal the one singer Bill Gaither privately admitted he regretted letting go. And the answer is someone you would never expect. You don't want to miss that. Mark Lowry is 67 years old. He grew up in Houston, Texas, the son of a Southern Baptist deacon. And even as a child, he was the kid who could make the entire church laugh and then break your heart with a song before the laughter had finished echoing. He joined the Gaither Vocal Band in 1988, and for the 13 years that followed, he was the soul of that group in ways that went far beyond his vocal parts. He was the man who wrote "Mary Did You Know," a song he first put to paper as a poem for a church Christmas pageant, long before it became one of the most recorded Christian songs of the last 50 years. He was the one who could walk onto a homecoming stage in front of 10,000 people and spend 5 minutes telling a story about his mother, and by the time he finished, half the audience would be crying and the other half would still be laughing. He held grief and joy in the same hand, in a way that couldn't be manufactured, because it wasn't. What was at stake in this story was never just a career decision. It was the question of, what happens to a man when the gift that defines him starts to carry a cost he can no longer hide? What nobody saw from the outside was what those years were costing Mark Lowry on the inside. By the mid-1990s, the Gaither Homecoming series had become something no one had predicted. What began in 1991 as a single informal afternoon of singing in Bill Gaither's studio in Alexandria, Indiana, just old friends gathered around a piano, had grown into a movement. The videos were selling millions of copies. The tours were filling arenas. The Gaither Vocal Band, with Mark Lowry as its most visible and beloved personality, was performing well over 100 dates a year. Mark was not just performing on those dates. He was writing material, recording solo projects, doing comedy tours on the side, and carrying the public weight of being the face of a ministry he believed in completely. People who traveled with him during those years remember him as the last one laughing at the end of a long night and the first one on the bus before the next morning's drive. He poured everything out at every stop. There was never a half effort, never a night where he held something back. But somewhere in the late 1990s, something began to shift. Not in the music, not in his relationship with Bill or the rest of the vocal band. Inside him, the songs that used to move him were starting to move around him instead of through him. He was still performing them with everything he had. The audiences still felt it. The laughter and the tears were still happening in the right order. But he knew something was different, and he knew it in a place that the applause couldn't reach. He talked to people close to him about it in pieces, never the full picture at once. He prayed about it. He tried to push through the way you do when you have built your life around a calling and cannot imagine that calling changing. But there is a specific kind of pain that belongs to a man whose entire public identity is joy, whose job is to make people laugh and lift them towards something higher. When that joy starts to feel like something being summoned rather than something that simply lives in him, He carried that feeling longer than he should have. And when it finally became too heavy to carry alone, he had the conversation that changed everything. The conversation with Bill Gaither didn't happen in a conference room or a manager's office. It happened the way the most honest conversations always happen, quietly, between two people who had spent more than a decade building something together and trusted each other with the weight of it. Mark told him he was finished, not angry, not resentful, just genuinely, spiritually empty. He said he was afraid that if he kept going the way he was going, he would eventually stand on a stage and the audience would hear the performance, but not the person. And for a man who had built everything, he was on the belief that what he gave people had to be real, that the laughter and the tears both had to come from somewhere true. That was the one line he could not cross. What Mark Lowry said in that conversation was not a career decision. It was a confession. He told Bill he didn't have anything left to give that was real. And Bill Gaither, who had spent 4 decades watching what this music could do to people and what it could ask of them, listened. When Mark finished talking, Bill didn't argue. He didn't try to reason him back into the seat. He said he understood, and he told Mark that what he had just done, telling the truth out loud when it was easier to keep going, took more courage than anything he had ever seen him do on a stage. Mark Lowry announced his departure from the Gaither Vocal Band in 2001. The reason given publicly was that he needed time to rest and pursue solo ministry. That was true, but it was not the full truth. What he needed, and what he had finally admitted to Bill before he told anyone else, was to go back to the beginning, back to the place where his faith was something he lived rather than something he performed. He needed to hear his own voice again without a microphone in front of it. The years that followed were quieter than anything his fans had seen from him. He wrote. He traveled to small churches that could barely fill a parking lot. He did comedy performances where he talked openly about doubt and grace and what it feels like when the very thing God gave you starts to feel like something you're carrying rather than something carrying you. And slowly, over time, something came back, not the same as before. Deeper, more his own. When he eventually returned to the Gaither stage, the people closest to him said they could see the difference right away. Not diminished, deepened. The laughter was still there, but there was something behind it now that had not been there before. Something that only comes from going away honestly and finding your way back the same way. That man who sat across from Bill Gaither and told the truth, who chose the harder path when the easier one was right in front of him and the crowd was still cheering. That is the Mark Lowry that the people who love this music should know. His departure from the Gaither Vocal Band was not a failure. It was an act of faith. The willingness to step back from a platform that had given him his life, because he believed that showing up hollow was worse than not showing up at all. That's not weakness. That is the kind of character that doesn't get celebrated enough in gospel music, where the pressure to keep performing, keep smiling, and keep giving is relentless and sometimes invisible to the people in the seats. Mary, Did You Know has now been recorded by more than 300 artists. It has been heard in churches, in hospitals, in living rooms, and on concert stages all over the world. It came from a man who was genuinely trying to ask a real question, not write a song that would sell. A man who believed that the deepest things in faith are found not in the certainty, but in the honest wondering. That song has outlasted every season of his life. It will outlast this one too. Bill Gaither has spent 60 years building a world where gospel music belongs to everyone, where the elderly and the young, the grieving and the grateful can all find a seat and feel seen. What Mark Lowry gave to that world for the years he carried it, and what he gave up to protect what he brought to it, is a story worth sitting with for a little while. Thank you for sitting with this story today. It's the kind of story that doesn't make the front page, but deserves to be told. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. And next, we're going to reveal the one singer Bill Gaither privately said he regretted letting go. And I promise, when you hear the name, you will not see it coming.